Gentlemen, my name is Peter Husey. I'm Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at the Mitchell Institute as part of the Air Force Association. I want to thank you for being here to take part in our 20th Nuclear Triad Symposium. This one is entitled Second to None, Working Together to Modernize America's Nuclear Deterrent. I want to also thank our co-sponsors, which are the Cyber Innovation Center and Louisiana Tech Research Institute of Bossier City, Louisiana, adjacent to Global Strike Command. We are honored today and fortunate to have Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Voorhies, who is a Colonel Select next month. He is Air Force Global Strike Command's lead on GBSD, the Next Generation Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, which will be the follow-on to Minuteman III. Colonel Voorhies has served as a missile combat crew member, instructor, evaluator, Chief of Emergency War Order Training, and Chief of Exercises for the Wing Inspector General. He has served at headquarters, Air Force Global Strike Command, as a speechwriter and aide-de-camp to the commander. He also was the commander of the 91st Operations Support Squadron at Minot Air Force Base. And we at Minot say hello to the colonel because we do one other symposium every year on nuclear deterrence, and that's sponsored by the Minot Task Force 21 and the wonderful people at Minot, North Dakota. And I know many of my friends in the Minot community will be tuning into this presentation, sir. I want to thank you also for taking the time to speak with us. I'd like to start by giving you the opportunity to tell us what are the major tasks of Global Strike Command regarding nuclear modernization within the next 4 or 5 years, and also what's going on with the GBSD program and how is it going to be different from the Minuteman III program. With that, Colonel, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Husey, for the opportunity. I was very excited to be a part of this, and I was real excited at the beginning because I was told it was going to be a panel, and I was looking forward to it. But you know, with our current environment that we have going on, I guess Zoom it is. Yes. So here we go. I've been in the job since about June, and the first day that I went in down to get our briefing on GBSD, I was really excited. I knew that I was going to get to learn about this new system. And I was just looking forward to the opportunity. And I get down there and the gentleman that's giving me the brief looks at me and says, I have the most important thing you have to understand right away. We're going to get it out of the way right up front. And I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I'm excited. And he looks right at me and says, this is not Minuteman III. You need to take your Minuteman III hat and you need to put it aside. This is GBSD. It's a completely new system. And I said, yep, I understand. I got it. But it took me a while to really internalize what he was getting at. And each and every day I have to almost challenge myself to think, and we have to challenge ourselves to think that this isn't Minuteman III, and how are we going to design this system when we go about it. So with that, I'd like to just talk a little bit about, just so we're all on the same page, about what I mean by that when I say Minuteman III. So as we all know, Minuteman III first placed on alert at Minot Air Force Base, like we discussed. Minot, what a great place, in August of 1970. So 50 years of, you know, uninterrupted nuclear deterrence. It's an amazing feat, and it's an amazing feat because Minuteman III had a service life design for 10 years, and now it's, you know, going on 50 years, and it's going to provide nuclear deterrence out another, you know, into the end of next decade. So it's going to be it's an amazing weapon system. But that system was only designed for that 10 years. And it was designed in the 60s and the 70s. And it had a super tightly coupled system architecture for it. And by that, I mean that if you made a change to something on this side, and whether hardware or software, it would reverberate throughout the entire system, and you would have to change other things as well. And so that drove cost and time to each of our upgrades that we've done. Because it was only designed for 10 years, they didn't think about where they put things. It didn't matter because it was only going to be 10 years. By the time that part needed to be replaced, we'd be on to a whole new missile. So when we looked at GBSD and the requirements for GBSD, we needed to approach it a little bit differently. So the first thing they started with was 2075. Now, 2075 is a long ways off. You know, this system will be on alert till 2075. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to be in 2075. I'm pretty confident I know where it is, or shortly thereafter, but it's a long ways away. But to build a system that's going to last till 2075, that has to be your starting point, and then work backwards. So we needed a system that could address the future needs of the JFAC commanders 50 years down the road and meet his or her requirements. So it takes a different approach. Some of the things that they had to look at were, you had to look at an open architecture. You needed a system that could be absolutely modular, could accept new additions, kind of like an app on a phone, right? We should be able to download an app, and that now app is on your phone. We needed to embrace the digital engineering environment, and we needed to make sure that it had low technical risk now and could be upgraded when needed in the future. And our SPO has done, our system program office has done an amazing job of doing that for us out of Hill Air Force Base. And they're, in working with Northrop Grumman and the contractor, they've been able to, design this system that will meet the future needs and allow it to be functionally partitioned. And by functionally partitioned, I just mean that you can take one and upgrade one piece and it doesn't affect anything else. So they've been able to do that. So let's talk a little bit about GBSD, the weapon system. What are we getting? So they're going to refurb all the LFs. And by refurb, we're digging down 30 to 40 feet down under the ground, checking the concrete, fixing any of the leaking or anything that was going on, any of the cracks. We found out that the concrete actually is very, very good, in very, very good shape. They're going to extend the apron up at the top, the concrete apron around the LF, and they're going to make all of the LFs across all three wings exactly the same for orientation. So at Malmstrom, they have a different orientation than they do at Minot and F.E. Warren, and they will all be the same. So that if you went from Malmstrom to Minot and you were a maintainer, you would see no difference other than the landscape around you when you're driving out to alert. That would be it. But once you get to the sites, all the sites will look the same. We're going to do complete new missile alert facilities and new launch control centers. And then at each of the wings, there's going to be an integrated command center, and kind of like what I would say is like an AOC, for an example. But in there at that command center, you're going to have defenders, we'll have maintainers, operators, cyber warriors, all integrated together in one facility, overseeing the day-to-day mission that's going on at the wing. And within that process, we'll have an updated command and control system that allows us to do all of that. So how do we ensure that the new GBSD meets the requirements of those that are going to operate, maintain, and defend the system? So when I challenge our folks every day when we're reviewing the designs from Northrop Grumman and from the SPO, when we get those designs in, we always have to look at it and say, how is this going to affect the person out at the field? How is this going to affect the guy that is operating it, the lady that's defending it, the operators that are operating it? We have to look at that from them. So when you put airmen first, when you put our airmen first, it's kind of a different way of doing it. We didn't really do that with Minuteman III. They didn't do that back in the day because it was a 10-year system. They were just popping out new missiles just constantly. It was just a nice rotation. So with GBSD, we know this is the long term, so we need to make sure that this is the missile that we can operate, maintain, and defend very easily. So let's just take a couple of examples and look at that. So for instance, on maintenance, GBSD will be easier to maintain than Minuteman III. 95% of all the maintenance tasks that we do in the silo will be able to be done in less than 6 hours. So let's talk about what that means. Just a real quick example. So guidance replacement. Currently today, if you do a guidance replacement, it takes at least 6 hours to do. It requires rolling the door back. It requires taking the bombs off, getting down to the missile guidance set, taking that out, putting a new one on, restacking the bombs, roll the door back over. To do all of that, we have to have a significant number of security forces, multiple maintenance teams, and it's an all-day event for the operators. With GBSD, that will all be done within the silo. There will be no exposure to the weapons. Will all be done in the silo. It will require one maintenance team to come down. They will open up a panel. They'll pull out, a device, pull it out of the missile, stick the new one right in. Should take about 1.5 hours. So from 6 hours and multiple teams, lots of security to one maintenance team with maybe a couple security members, and that's it, 1.5 hours. This change will also reduce the number of weapons exposures just throughout. So for instance, we'll have 2/3 less weapons exposure. So there will be 2/3 less times that the nuclear weapons are exposed to the elements, whether that's in a vehicle or with the door rolled back. This will make the system more secure. So from a security standpoint, that's great, but also the new design will have a layered approach to security. It will reduce our false alarms. It's going to have redundant systems that will be able to reduce. So if one system goes down, there will be another one that backs it up. So we won't immediately have to send out manning, guards to man the site, to camper a site, or to secure it. We won't have to do that physical posting that we've had to do in Minuteman III. And we'll be able to reduce the overall footprint of the security forces within the missile complex. On the ops side, technology has allowed for us to reduce the number of launch control centers, but still allow us to have more LCCs looking at each of the missiles, which is fantastic. We have the integrated command center, which I discussed a little bit earlier, and it will provide that overall wing approach to the mission, to perspective, a mission perspective. They will have oversight and with the daily operations, and we'll be able to kind of get a sense of what's going on across the entire complex. But besides that, they also did some human factors within the Launch Control Center. So for instance, Launch Control Center, the new one now, will have a kitchenette. It will have a bathroom with a shower. It'll have a separate sleeping quarters, almost like a bedroom, with 2 beds in it, so that we won't have to do hot bunking like we've had to do for the last 50 years. They thought about what would you need to operate the system from a crew perspective first, and as well as the missile perspective. So these changes will impact the quality of life of our operators, our defenders, and our maintainers significantly. When you're looking at how you design the system that's going to last 50 years, some of the big things that you have to look at are the overall life cycle costs, because that's how you can make this an affordable weapon system. And by asking how it's going to affect each of the individual people that use the system day in and day out and make them the priority, we can ensure that those lower life cycle costs are going to be realized, and then the system will be designed correctly. So it's funny, we have meetings, and I have a couple different captains that work for me, younger captains that work for me, and some young master sergeants that work for me. And one of the things that we always are talking about is, I say, hey guys, we have to get this right. I'm going to be dead and gone long before, I'll be retired out of the Air Force long before this thing comes to full fruition. But they need to understand that they're going to be the ones that bring it on. So we have to get it right, because there is nobody else. We'll never be able to do this again in our Air Force for them, right? I mean, it'll be 2075 is a long time away before we start redesigning the system. So this is our one opportunity to get it right. And I challenge them each and every day that you have to look at how this is going to affect each of those people out there. Because if we get the SPO to do their job, which they're doing an amazing job of it with the open architecture and digital engineering and modularity, and then we also get it right from how it's going to be maintained and operated and defended, we're going to have a system that will last that full 50 years and be an effective weapon system to the very end. It's a once in a generation system, and we're just honored to be able to be part of it at this time. So with that, Mr. Husey, I'd love to take any questions you have.
I've been particularly interested in the reduced costs for Minuteman, for GBSD versus Minuteman, because if you've noticed, the CBO studies have all assumed an increasing cost for maintenance, not only the bombers, but ICBMs and subs. And I think that may be something. First question is, how is GBSD progressing? Does anything about the program keep you up at night? What are the positive things you're seeing going on? Because the assumption has been the cost of this system will exceed our estimates, and it will come in later than we otherwise would like it to, when in fact on things like the fuse, we've actually seen a reduction in costs. and a acceleration of the program. So with that question, would you take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will tell you that GBSD is progressing very, very nicely. It has hit, the program office has hit every one of their timelines, but within a matter of days. So just recently we went through milestone B, in the process of EBR, going towards IBR in February. And those are the baseline reviews. And those are going very well. I would say that the design is exactly what we asked as far as the modularity piece. They've taken that to heart and they're really looking at it, because that is how we can drive those costs down. And then the things that we just discussed in my opening comments about the life cycle costs with our maintenance and defenders and our operators. It's really important for us to calculate the reductions and be able to reduce. So we'll be able to reduce our manpower across the board. And that's going to save. Manpower drives a very large, bill, and there's a lot of bill that goes with that. So by being able to reduce the number of manpower that we have out there will be a really good thing from that. So all in all, I'd say they're doing a great job with GBSD. It's moving right along. I look forward to the next 6 months. I think we'll see we'll really get a good understanding of what the baseline of this weapon system will be. We're still in the early stages of that. And I look forward to what their design has to come as we go forward.
That's good. That follows on to the next question, which is, what does GBSD technically bring to the table different than Minuteman? If you can talk about either range or penetration capability, or just basically the deterrent aspects of the system.
Yeah, so it's a tough system to talk about on an unclassified, network, just like our B-21 and our other systems that we have. I absolutely agree. But I will say that they're using, the best of technology that we have that's available, going with that low risk options that provide us, better range, better capability, better accuracy as we go forward. So, that's what we're getting. But I think where you're really going to see, those are obviously amazing things for the warfighter. For the taxpayer, the piece that I love is just that modularity, the open architecture, the digital engineering, the human factors piece that are going to drive down those life cycle costs as we go on.
The next question I have is, it's a question that's been raised often about Minuteman. Can we extend the life of Minuteman? It is now by law has to go through 2030, and this is around 2029, 2030 is when you have the IOC for GBSD. Could you address the issues of, can you extend the life of Minuteman III as an alternative to GBSD?
Yeah. So when they were starting the AOA, the analysis of alternatives that they did when they were looking at this, they looked at this in 2014. And in 2014, they went through and calculated and did a very in-depth study to look, would it be more cost effective to do like a Minuteman III SLEP, or would it be more cost effective to bring on a GBSD, a new system? And that they found out is that it was more cost effective to bring on a GBSD system. And that was in 2014. And now you're, 6 years further down the road. And so it definitely leads itself to where we need to do the new GBSD versus trying to do any type of an upgrade.
My next question has to do with, people have suggested, let's get rid of the ICBM leg of the triad. They've called it a sink or a sponge, but would you address that to the extent you can from the point of view of deterrence, which is what we're talking about here? What happens in your mind if the ICBM leg of the triad is gradually or even eliminated, where we don't build GBSD, we just phase out Minuteman?
Yeah, as a 20-year ICBM operator, I'm obviously very passionate about ICBMs and am excited to be part of GBSD. But overall, just anything intercontinental ballistic missiles, GBSD, Minuteman III, I'm all in on them. I think that they're very, very important. they're deployed out there, as we've talked about. There's 450 silos, 400 missiles, or approximately 400 missiles out there right now. That is an almost insurmountable targeting challenge for an adversary. And I remember used to, as you mentioned that I was worked in the headquarters here before. I used to follow General Klotz around and then General Kowalski around and listen to those guys talk a lot. And they used to talk about how important it was to have the missiles out there spread across the country, because it takes a full attack from another country to be able to get after those. You know, they just talk about, we are the most responsive. So once you get that dual phenomenology, or that confirmed by multiple systems out there that this is a real attack, the president could authorize the launch. But it's just one of those things where an adversary has no incentive to try to strike the United States with our ICBMs in the field.
Let me ask you a question that I've asked of one of your colleagues, Colonel Morgan, who has spoken at the symposiums before, and that is the issue that Minuteman is destabilizing, or ICBMs are destabilizing in general, because they're on either hair trigger alert, or you have to use them very quickly in a crisis, which could mean you might make a mistake thinking that you're being attacked when you're not. Would you address that issue to the extent that you can?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't enjoy the term hair trigger alert very much. Actually, it has always bothered me. There is nothing hair trigger about being on alert. The way that it is structured, it is one of the most controlled environments that I've ever worked in my entire life, if not the most controlled environment that I've ever worked in. It is so structured from the standpoint of how we get messages from the higher authority, and how we check to make sure that those are, authentic and valid and authentic messages from the President of the United States. And we train that so often. There is just it's just not even, it's nothing that I can even express on how controlled and how, it's almost frustrating, right? I almost get flustered talking about it, because I'm like, there's just no possible way that it could be an accidental launch or anything like that, because it is so structured the way we get it. I've also worked in the National Military Command Center and sent out those messages, and understand how controlled that side of it is as well.
Right.
And how that they get, when there's launch warning, how you get people on, and you have multiple organizations telling you that this is a confirmed launch or not a confirmed launch, or what, that it's just a test, or whatever it is that's going on. And there's multiple agencies up talking about that, and they exercise it all the time. And it is just so structured and so controlled that the hair trigger piece, like I said, it almost just makes me cringe every time I hear it.
Well, I share that. I've listened at great length with Colonel Morgan, where he said it would be like a sheriff who has to get a key to unlock his holster in order to pull a gun out while the guy's shooting at him.
Right. That's exactly.
You're not going
exactly
first.
Right. Yeah.
Let me make I want to clarify things, because it's often said that a president has to make a decision very quickly in a crisis to use the ICBMs or not use them. Would you lay out, in my understanding, an attack of the dimension you're talking about to take out all our ICBMs and the launch control centers would require our adversaries to go on a higher alert level, and that we would see them, in a sense, preparing for something that was, maybe we ought to put more subs to sea, put our bombers up in the air. My issue is here, is it not true that the president does not have to use any particular element of the triad, either quickly or rashly, or in a matter of minutes, that we can ride out an attack if necessary, because we have sufficient resources to retaliate?
Absolutely. And just to clarify on an earlier comment I made when I said that, that there's 450 or 400 targets out there, 450 LFs and 400 missiles out there, that they would, when an enemy would have to expend a lot to get after all of those. And then when they arrive, they may or may not be there, is really what I should have said. They're not always, because it's totally dependent on the President of the United States. They could ride through the attack and make sure that it was an attack and just see what happens and run through that. And we will have systems that survive. It's designed to be a survivable system. And you could also, as we discussed, launch with confirmed warning that it is actually an attack, and that would be based on the President of the United States. So the President would get those inputs and could make the decision whether to launch or to write it out as you described, and then assess what you have left, and then respond in kind that way. So, and yes, as you said, you would definitely have intelligence that would allow us to see that they have risen up in their posture levels or whatever. So those are all things that, it's tough because we practice those different events in training scenarios, but in the real world, we see these movements very easy. So in a training ride, you might jump in and you have a 4-hour training ride, and the world rapidly, progresses down. But it just doesn't happen that fast. Things don't happen in a 4-hour trainer ride. You're jumping from, week, you're in here this week and this is your level. And then it's a week later and a week later and a week later. And you can condense an entire, 2-week scenario into a 4-hour trainer ride. That kind of doesn't just happen in the real world. So in the real world, there's going to be signs, there's going to be things that our intel professionals are going to see and be able to, bring up to people's level, and we would have very good warning on what's going on in the world.
Let me ask you a final question, and that has been some comments during the congressional hearings that because Global Strike Command is a relatively small command, that they're going to have trouble doing both the GBSD and the B-21 program simultaneously because you are doing them very close together. Could you address the fact of the capability of Global Strike to do its job?
Yeah, well, I can talk about our office. So I will tell you, just within our A58, our office here, we have an office that is strictly just working GBSD, and we have an office that's doing B-21, and there's an office that's doing the bomber sustainment kind of programs. We have an office that's working our higher classified, SAT programs, and all of those are working in concert with each other to make sure that we are working together. So yeah, we're a lean, we're a young command, but small, lean, young, those sound like good words when you're talking about being able to get work done. I can tell you that we have been able to get a lot of work done even throughout COVID. There's been great, we did EBR during COVID, Milestone B during COVID for GBSD. That was because we had a staff that was fairly small. We could come into work. We didn't have to, when we did come in, the social distancing, we just were able to spread out a little bit more and make sure that we could get that. So there's some benefits of being a little bit lean, a little bit younger, a little bit, smaller. It allows us to be a little bit more adaptable and adaptive as we go through and do this. So I would say, and we're able to work together. I was on a meeting the other day where we were talking with the B-21 office, just working with them about how could we pass on some good lessons learned or best practices from their program. They were able to give it to us, and we're going to start implementing some of that, or we're looking in to see if we can implement that in the future. So I think that it really helps us to be that leaner command because we have good context and we're able to work together as one cohesive team.
I'm going to ask one more, but it has to do, how is the cooperative work with your industry team that's working with you on GBSD?
So Northrop Grumman has done a great job with GBSD so far, and they've really reached out and kind of leaned forward. And I'll just give you one example of this. So they have in Promontory, Utah, they have a site up there, and they have gone out on their own and built a 1963, or they're in the process of building a 1963 LF. And they're going to build it. They've poured the concrete. They're building an entire thing with all the rebarb, with all of the, this just to the spec that it was built in 1963. Then they're going to treat the concrete so that it is aged to the 1963 level. And then they're going to go convert that to GBSD. And they're doing that
Interesting.
because they want to make sure they understand how to do this best. And they don't want to take any chances. And so they're leaning forward and doing all that. They were in the process of building that before we went into, at Milestone B. They were in the process of building that.
Wow.
So they're leaning forward and doing some really good things for us, and they've been very receptive to working together. Now, COVID's been a challenge, but they've been able to do it. They're there at Utah. They've got their now headquarters for GBSD in Utah, right there by the SPO office, and they're only like 1 or 2 miles apart. And I think that we were out there for EBR, we couldn't do anything in person. So even though we were only 1 mile apart, we're doing everything via Zoom or, teleconference secure VTC. So I'm used to seeing people on the cameras like this because that's what we do most of our meetings.
Well, thank you, Colonel Voorhies. I really want to thank you for taking the time, and my best to Colonel Morgan when you see him, but also your Commander General Ray, who is taping some remarks for this symposium that'll be starting December 10th. So on behalf of the Mitchell Institute here in Washington and Arlington, Virginia, the Cyber Innovation Center, and the Louisiana Tech Research Center are 3 sponsors of our event here. I want to thank you for taking the time today to speak with us, and good luck to you. And we will hopefully see you when the coronavirus goes away or is diminished, and so we can come out and see you personally at Global Strike Command. But I want to thank you, sir, for your fine remarks, and you're very informative about the nature and where we're going with GBSD. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.